I sat on the hard, green plastic chair in the doctor's waiting room, my eyes fixed on the blank, sterile wall in front of me, not really seeing anything at all. Just then, the phone in my purse buzzed. I jumped, startled. The screen lit up. Angela, my only daughter. The sight of her name made my chest ache with a strange mix of warmth and distance. Since her father passed, Angela had been calling more often, sometimes to check in, sometimes to remind me about appointments, sometimes just to make small talk. I always believed it was a daughter's love for her mother. I lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello, Angela?" I said, my voice as gentle as always. Her voice came through, but it was so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. "Mom, we're leaving for Europe tomorrow. I sold the beach house and your car. We needed the money. That's all. Goodbye." And then, click, the line went dead. I sat there, frozen. Her short, brutal announcement was a knife straight through my heart. Angela, the daughter I had carried, the child I had raised for 45 years, had just informed me, without a trace of feeling, that she had sold everything that remained of my life with Robert. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't ask for my opinion. She didn't bother with an explanation. Just a statement. Then she hung up. For a moment, the waiting room spun. I could hear the low murmur of voices around me, but they sounded distant, like echoes from another world. My eyes stared into space, but all I could see was Robert, sitting at our little wooden table in the beach house. He was smiling his gentle smile, raising a warm mug of coffee, and saying his familiar line, "Beautiful morning, isn't it, my love?" I clutched my purse, gripping it so tightly I thought my knuckles would break, as if it were the only thing holding me together. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. There was only a hollow, crushing emptiness, as if my very soul had been ripped out. 45 years. I had given my youth, my energy, my entire life to raising Angela. I had skipped meals, worn old clothes, and worked extra jobs just so she could go to the best schools, wear nice dresses, and never feel like she had less than her friends. I thought that love and sacrifice would forge an unbreakable bond between us. But I was wrong. In less than 2 minutes, she had reduced it all to nothing. But a strange thing happened. After the initial wave of shock and humiliation, another feeling began to surface: calmness. A terrifying, profound calm. I didn't burst into tears like I usually did when I was hurt. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, took a deep breath, and smiled. Because I suddenly remembered Angela didn't know everything. She thought the beach house and Robert's old Ford were all I had left. She thought I was now destitute. But she was wrong. A memory surfaced, clear as day. It was an afternoon 6 months ago, just 3 days before Robert passed away. He handed me a simple, manila envelope. His hand trembled, but his eyes were steady. "Antonia," he'd said, his voice raspy, "put this in your dresser drawer. If anything happens to me, open it, but only when you're truly ready." I hadn't thought much of it then. When he died, I was lost in grief and forgot all about the envelope. It wasn't until this moment, hearing Angela's betrayal, that I remembered it. And so, there I sat in a crowded waiting room. My heart shattered, but a faint smile playing on my lips. A smile that, if anyone had seen it, would have made them think I'd lost my mind. "My dearest daughter," I whispered to myself, "you think I'm finished? You think you can sell my entire life with a single phone call? No, Angela, you have no idea, and I'm going to show you." A nurse called my name. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but my eyes were sharp. The doctor checked my vitals and told me I was fine, just to rest and eat well. I nodded and thanked him, but my mind was already on that envelope. When I stepped out of the clinic, the bright sunlight hit my face. I walked slowly to the bus stop, my purse swinging at my side. I didn't have a car anymore, according to Angela. But it didn't matter. Sitting on the worn-out bench, I watched the people hurry by, each lost in their own worries. I had my own, of course. But for the first time since Robert died, a different kind of fire was lit inside me, the fire of will. Angela had just started her own war, and I, a 70-year-old mother, was not going to surrender. I would go home. I would open that envelope. And then the real game would begin. I returned to my small house, stepping into the familiar space that had held half a lifetime of memories. The white walls had yellowed with age, and the family photos lining the hallway seemed to watch me in silence, waiting for an explanation. I took off my shoes, sank into the old sofa, and in an instant, memories of Robert flooded back, so powerful I had to press a hand to my chest. Robert. That man had been my entire world. We met at a small church social when I was just in my 20s. He was clumsy, not one for fancy words, but his kind eyes and honest smile were unforgettable. He was a bus driver, and his salary wasn't much, but he always worked hard to give me and Angela a decent home. For 45 years, Robert never missed a single morning making coffee for me. The day he passed, he had managed to place a cup with a little cream on my nightstand and kiss my forehead. "Good morning, my love." Those were the last words I ever heard from him. I would never forget them. I looked around the living room, on the mantelpiece. The old pendulum clock that Robert used to tinker with whenever it acted up still stood. The coffee table still bore the faint scratches from when Angela was little, practicing her letters with a pencil. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the little girl I once held in my arms. The Angela from back then was a different person. She used to chirp "Mommy" every time she came home from school, running into my arms to show me a flower she'd picked from the schoolyard or a crayon drawing of our house. I remembered the nights she was sick with fever, how I'd stay up all night by her bedside, placing a cool cloth on her forehead and whispering lullabies. I remembered the light in her eyes the first time Robert took her to the ocean and taught her how to build sandcastles. But somewhere along the way, that light had faded. Maybe it was when she became a teenager and started comparing herself to her friends, wanting expensive things that Robert and I couldn't easily afford. We tried. We sacrificed. But it seemed the more we gave, the less she appreciated it. Edward came into the picture when Angela started college. He was a handsome man with a smooth tongue and a pocket full of empty promises. I never trusted him. His handshake was limp, and his eyes were always darting around, as if constantly calculating his next move. Robert didn't like him either, but Angela was mesmerized. She blindly believed he would give her a life of luxury. On her wedding day, I smiled for the photos, but my heart was heavy. I knew, from that moment on, the distance between my daughter and me would only grow, and I was right. It didn't take long for Edward to prove my instincts correct. He always looked down on me, calling me old-fashioned and suggesting I sell my assets to invest in Angela's future, more than once. I overheard him whispering in her ear, "Your mom has nothing left. Don't let her drag you down." But I never thought Angela would actually betray me in such a cruel way. Selling the beach house, the one Robert and I had saved for 15 years to buy. That house was where we'd spent so many bright summers, where Robert had built a swing for her with his own hands, where we gathered on cold Christmas nights. To me, it wasn't just a house. It was a treasure chest of memories, a piece of our family's soul. And the Ford, Robert's beloved car. He cherished it. Every weekend, he would wash it, change the oil, and polish every detail. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered on the driver's seat, a ghostly presence. Angela knew that. She knew how much that car meant to me, yet she sold it without a second thought, as if it were just a piece of junk. I sat motionless on the sofa, my trembling hand grazing the frame of Angela's wedding photo on the wall. In the picture, she was beaming, while Robert and I stood beside her, our eyes full of hope. I sighed. When did that sweet little girl turn into a woman who would throw everything away for money? When did Angela stop seeing me as a mother and start seeing me as an empty wallet? Perhaps some of the blame was mine. I had spoiled her, thinking that unconditional love would be enough to keep her close. I had looked the other way when she was disrespectful, when she took money without asking. I believed that one day she would understand. But today, that phone call proved me wrong. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and opened the dresser drawer. My fingers touched the yellowed envelope Robert had given me. The paper was slightly worn, but his handwriting was still neat. For Antonia, when you're ready. My heart pounded. I knew that inside this envelope might be the answer to everything. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it. As if it might open itself, I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and saw Angela's face once more, not the little girl from long ago, but the woman who had just discarded me with a cold, heartless phone call. I clenched my fists. It was time to find out what Robert had left me, and it was time for Angela to learn a lesson she would never forget. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. A chill ran down my spine, as if Robert himself were standing in the room, watching me. The papers inside were thick, heavier than I'd expected. I laid them on the table, my breath catching in my throat before I dared to turn the first page. Before me was a stack of legal documents, stamped and signed. I wasn't an expert in law, but I knew at a glance that this was no small matter. Deeds to properties, bank statement, stock certificates, a pile nearly an inch thick. I was stunned. For all the years we were together, Robert was just a bus driver. His salary was enough to support our family, with a little extra to buy the beach house after years of saving. But here, right in front of me, was a fortune. Beneath the documents was a folded letter, written in his familiar hand. I unfolded it, my hands shaking. Antonia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I'm sorry for keeping this secret for so long, but I wanted us to live our lives together without the weight of money. I wanted you to believe that our love was all we needed. The truth is, many years ago, I began quietly investing the money we saved. I bought real estate, shares in companies, and built it up little by little. Now, you are the legal owner of it all. Don't be afraid. Remember, you are not poor. Antonia, you are wealthy, and you deserve to live with your head held high. But be careful. Don't let Angela know too soon. I worry that if she knew, it would change her. Let her first learn the true value of love and family. With all my love, Robert. I let the letter fall from my fingers, my vision blurring with tears. His words were etched into my heart. Robert, my simple, hard-working husband, had secretly been a brilliant investor. He hadn't just left me memories, he'd left me a small empire, all in my name. I went through the papers one by one. A high-rise apartment in the city center, a row of rental properties in the suburbs, a small hotel by the coast, shares in 2 transportation companies and a construction firm. And then, the document that made me gasp, the deed to the very apartment building where Angela and Edward were living. I gripped the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. My daughter, the one who had just casually sold my assets, was living in a building that I owned. She had no idea. She thought she held all the power, while I was a helpless old woman. The reality was the complete opposite. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading everything, until the sun had set and darkness filled the room. But inside me, a bright flame had just been ignited. Robert was right. Angela couldn't know about this yet. She had to learn a lesson about responsibility, about respect, and about a love that money can't buy. I stood up, folded the letter carefully, and put it back in the envelope. But this time, I didn't hide it in a drawer. I placed it in a locked box where I could easily access it. I knew that from now on, every decision I made would revolve around this secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the window frame. Faces flashed through my mind. Angela as a smiling child, Angela glaring at me during an argument, Edward with his condescending smirk, and Robert, gentle and kind, as if he were still sitting beside me. I remembered all the times Angela had criticized me for not being modern, for clinging to the old beach house and the worn-out car. I'd always been patient, thinking that if I just loved her enough, everything would be okay. But today, I understood. My blind patience had only made her despise me more. The moonlight cast shadows on the ceiling. I whispered to Robert, "I understand now, my love. I won't let her continue to disrespect me. I will use what you've left, not to live in luxury, but to teach Angela a lesson she deserves." The next morning, I sat in the kitchen, brewing a cup of hot tea. The familiar aroma mixed with the scent of old wood, bringing a strange sense of peace. But I was no longer the weak, abandoned woman I had been. I was becoming someone else, someone who knew she had power, strength, and control of the game. Angela thought she had won, that I was left with nothing, that I would just sit here and cry until my dying day. She had no idea that the chess match had just begun, and the most powerful piece was in my hand. I sipped my tea, letting the bitter taste linger. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, "My dear, I've let you have it easy for far too long. It's time you learn to face the consequences, and I will be the one to teach you." In the days that followed, I lived quietly, as if nothing had changed. On the surface, I was still a 70-year-old widow who walked slowly, wore old clothes, and carried a frayed handbag. I still went to the market to buy vegetables like the other elderly women in the neighborhood, still greeted my neighbors with a gentle smile, and still sat on my porch in the afternoons. No one suspected that a secret capable of changing everything lay hidden in my closet. My neighbors pitied me. Mrs. Miller from across the street often brought over freshly baked cookies. "Antonia, you need to eat. You're looking so thin." I would just smile and thank her, deliberately letting the exhaustion show on my face. I knew that the image of an old woman, recently widowed and abandoned by her child, would evoke sympathy. I needed that sympathy. It was the perfect cover. A few of Robert's old friends came to visit. They shook their heads in dismay when they heard the beach house had been sold. I would sigh and lower my gaze, playing the part of a helpless victim. In reality, my mind was busy calculating my next move. But to the world, I let them see a weak, impoverished Antonia, dependent on the kindness of others. At night, when the neighborhood was silent, I would change into my pajamas, sit alone at the dining table, and open a small notebook. Inside, I had carefully copied the list of assets Robert had left me. Next to each item, I outlined a plan: downtown apartment, contact the bank to assume management, coastal hotel, Find a lawyer for verification, company shares, appoint a proxy for shareholder meetings. I wrote each word with care, like an old student diligently doing her homework. Mr. Peterson, the lawyer, was the first person I contacted. On a rainy morning, I sat in the plush leather chair in his office. Peterson was in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses. He looked at me with surprise as I placed the stack of documents on his desk. "I need your help verifying all of this," I said, my voice calm. Peterson flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "Ma'am, if all of this is authentic, you're not just financially secure. You're one of the wealthiest people in this town." I clasped my hands together. "But I don't want anyone to know, especially not my daughter." He nodded, his gaze serious. "How long do you intend to keep this a secret?" I looked out the window at the rain tapping against the glass. "Until she learns what respect is. Right now, all she sees is money, not her mother." Peterson was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Antonia, I've worked with many wealthy people, but none have ever said that. I'm on your side." From that day on, I officially began the greatest performance of my life. By day, I was the poor widow. By night, I was the woman secretly managing a network of assets. I learned to lie with sincerity, to hide my strength behind tear-filled eyes. It wasn't hard to convince people I had nothing. People tend to believe in weakness more readily than in strength. Occasionally, Angela would call, not to ask how I was, but to boast about her travels, the fancy restaurants in Paris, the glamorous photos. Her voice always had a hint of mockery, as if to say, "See, Mom, this is the life we have now, thanks to me selling everything." I would listen, pretending to sigh with resignation. I never argued. I let her believe she was winning. But as soon as I hung up, I would open my notebook and add another line to my plan. Reclaim the beach house, Peterson to handle proceedings. My handwriting was firm, like an oath. Some nights, I would sit for hours in front of Robert's photo, whispering, "You see, my love, I'm acting in a play. The whole world thinks I'm weak, but I'm stronger than ever, and it's all thanks to you." In the silence, I could almost hear his deep, warm laughter, giving me strength. Weeks turned into a month, and I grew accustomed to my two faces. My neighbors praised my resilience. Friends sent letters of encouragement. Angela grew more distant, convinced I was nothing but a shadow. But I knew the day she would have to face the truth was coming. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. My silver hair fell around my shoulders. Wrinkles etched my face. My eyes were sunken. I saw an old woman. Yes. But behind that face was a soul that no longer trembled. I smirked. "We'll see, Angela," I said to my reflection. "You think I'm a loser. You don't know that I'm rewriting the rules of the game, one move at a time." I adjusted my scarf, picked up my bag, and headed to the market. I still looked like a frail old woman, but my steps on the pavement that day were steadier than they had ever been. I walked into Peterson's office on a crisp autumn morning. He was already waiting, a new, neatly organized file on his desk. The light from the window reflected off his glasses, making his eyes seem even more serious. "We'll start with the beach house," Peterson said, his voice measured. "You have every legal right to reclaim it. But the process will be complicated, as there's already a sales contract between Angela and the buyer." I sat up straight, my hands clasped in my lap. "I don't care how long it takes. I want it back." He nodded. "I'll send the legal notice this week. The house was in your name, and Angela had no right to sell it without your consent. The new owner will be forced to return it." Hearing those words, I felt my heart beat slow and steady. Each step forward was like a stitch mending the tear in my soul, small but secure. I was no longer helpless. I was taking action. Next, Peterson turned to another file. As for the Ford, that's simpler. You have the title. We can file a petition with the DMV to void the sale. They won't be able to keep the car for long. I nodded slightly, memorizing every detail. Each word he spoke was another brick, paving the path I was on. In the following days, I moved quietly between the courthouse, the bank, and the lawyer's office. I usually wore an old gray coat and worn-out shoes, deliberately blending into the crowd. Anyone who saw me would just see a tired old woman. No one knew that in my bag were documents powerful enough to turn everything upside down. One day, I stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the American flag waving against the blue sky. The wind was strong, and a strange sense of faith washed over me. Justice, if you knew how to pursue it, could still be on your side. I whispered, "Robert, you gave me the weapons. Now I will use them, one by one." I grew accustomed to discreet appointments. The bank managers addressed me as the owner, and the staff greeted me with polite bows. I signed stacks of paperwork, my signature shaky but filled with resolve. Each stroke of the pen was a promise. I would not let Angela steal what belonged to this family. At night, I would sit by the window, the soft lamplight illuminating the pages of my small notebook. I marked dates and recorded my progress. Notice sent, bank confirmed, meeting with transportation company next week. The words were like a steady heartbeat, keeping me focused. Sometimes, I would laugh to myself. I remembered the way Angela had sneered on the phone, thinking I had nothing left. She had no idea that while she was parading through Europe in designer clothes, I was slowly, silently, and surely taking everything back. But the deeper I went, the more pain I felt. I took no joy in my wealth. I only felt the bitterness of having to use legal procedures against my own daughter. Every time I signed a document, my heart ached, as if the ink were severing another thread of our bond. One evening, Peterson called, "Mrs. Antonia, there's something you should know. Edward is involved in some shady investments. I have a source who says he's using Angela's name on the paperwork." I gripped the phone. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And if things go south, Angela could face legal consequences." I fell silent. In my mind, I saw my daughter's face, proud and smiling next to the husband she trusted. A cold dread washed over me. She hadn't just betrayed me, she was letting herself be led into a pit of vipers. "I understand," I whispered. "Thank you. Mr. Peterson. We'll continue with the plan." After the call, I sat for hours in front of our family photo. In it, a young Angela sat on Robert's lap, her eyes shining. I asked myself, am I doing the right thing? Am I a cruel mother for letting my daughter sink deeper into her mistakes without pulling her out? Then I remembered Robert's words from his letter. Let her first learn the true value of love and family. He was right. If I rescued her now, she would never learn. She would continue to see me as nothing more than a backup plan. I nodded slowly, whispering, "You will have to learn, Angela. No matter how painful it is, you will have to learn." In the weeks that followed, I finalized the paperwork for the beach house. The buyer reluctantly signed it back over after receiving the legal notice. I rented a car and drove out to the coast alone. The wooden door was still there, its paint peeling from the salt air. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. The salty smell of the ocean filled my lungs, and memories rushed back. Robert fishing off the deck, a tiny Angela running along the sand with a kite. Tears streamed down my face for the first time in weeks, but this time, It wasn't just sadness, it was strength. I took out the new key, stepped inside, and ran my hand along the walls. "We're together again," I whispered. That evening, I returned home with a peaceful smile. I knew I had taken another firm step forward. Angela thought she had slammed a door shut, but I had just opened it again, quietly and decisively. I stood behind the curtain, looking out at the street. It was a bright, sunny morning, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. A taxi pulled up to the curb, and I watched as Angela and Edward emerged, pulling their suitcases behind them. Angela was wearing a vibrant red dress, her hair perfectly styled and dark sunglasses covering half her face. She walked with a confident stride, the click-clack of her heels echoing on the pavement, as if announcing her glamorous departure to the world. Edward, in a light-colored suit, looked arrogant, one hand on a suitcase, the other wrapped around his wife's waist. From where I stood, I could clearly see his smirk. It was a cold smile, devoid of love. It was the smile of someone who had just won a bet, not a husband taking his wife on vacation. Angela lifted her chin, glancing around to make sure no one missed her grand moment. She never once looked up at my window. There was no wave, no goodbye. The taxi drove away, leaving a thin trail of exhaust. I remained still, my hands clutching the edge of the curtain. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with an indescribable emptiness. My daughter was leaving the country, placing her trust in a man she believed in more than her own mother. I let the curtain fall and turned away. In the quiet house, the ticking of the wall clock seemed to accentuate each passing second. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down. The image of Angela still fresh in my mind, I took a sip, letting the bitter taste spread across my tongue. I realized that their departure no longer filled me with the despair it once would have. On the contrary, my mind felt clearer than ever. I knew that the moment Angela stepped into that taxi, she was stepping deeper into Edward's web, and that was when the assets Robert had left me would truly begin to work. That afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood. A few of the local women were gossiping on their porches. "Did you hear? Angela and her husband are off to Europe for a whole month." Well, when you have money, you can do whatever you want. Poor Antonia, all alone in that house. I just smiled and gave a slight nod, maintaining my role. No one knew that at that very moment. Mr. Peterson was calling to inform me that the paperwork to reclaim the beach house was nearly complete that evening. I turned on my old computer and checked my email. An online news article popped up with a photo of Angela and Edward at the airport, holding hands and smiling for the camera. I looked at it calmly, the sharp sting of pain now replaced by a sense of anticipation. I whispered to myself, "Go ahead, Angela. You think you're ascending to heaven, but you have no idea you're walking straight into a storm." As night fell, I opened a window to let in the cool air. The full moon illuminated my reflection in the glass. I saw an old woman with deep-set eyes, but in her gaze was something Angela could never imagine: resolve. The next day, I went to the bank to sign a few more papers, then stopped by the courthouse to meet with Peterson. He confirmed that in just a few more weeks, the beach house would be mine again. I nodded, a firm sense of conviction rising within me. On the way home, I saw a young couple holding their small child's hands as they crossed the street. The child was giggling, their eyes sparkling. My heart clenched. I suddenly remembered Angela as a little girl, how she used to hold my hand just like that, crossing a busy intersection with a carefree laugh. Now, another man was leading her, not to protect her, but to exploit her. I sat down on a park bench, watching the leaves fall. A wave of sadness washed over me, but I held it back. I knew that if I let my emotions take over, I would never finish what I had to do. Angela and Edward were gone, wrapped in their false pride. I remained, with a long-term plan and a newfound strength, between our two worlds. I chose silence, because silence was how I would maintain control. Before leaving the park, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Don't worry, Robert. Our daughter has to walk the path she has chosen, but I will be here, watching from the shadows, so that when she falls, she'll know where to turn." I walked away, my shadow stretching long and steady behind me. One morning in early winter, Peterson called. "Mrs. Antonia, it's all done. The beach house is yours again. The buyer no longer has any right to be there." I was silent for a moment. Those few words washed over me like a wave. I hung up the phone, put on a thick sweater, and went to the train station to head to the coast. The journey took nearly 2 hours, but I barely noticed the time. All I could think was, the house is mine again. When the train stopped, I grabbed my small suitcase and stepped onto the platform. The salty air filled my lungs, and the wind whipped around me. The familiar smell of the ocean made my eyes sting. I walked along the coastal road, where the maple trees had lost most of their leaves, and then I saw it. The house stood before me, its wooden door faded, its white walls stained by the salt and wind, a few roof tiles out of place, but to me it was beautiful. I walked closer, placed my hand on the wall, and felt a flood of memories. Suddenly, the door opened. A strange man stepped out, looking flustered. He was startled to see me. "Who are you?" I stood tall and answered simply, "I'm the owner of this house." He frowned, then lowered his voice. "I bought it from your daughter." I held out the papers Peterson had prepared for me. "That contract is void. I won the legal case. You have to leave." The man was silent for a moment, then he gave a small nod. He wasn't a bad person, just an unsuspecting buyer caught in the middle. He gathered his things and left with a hesitant handshake. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of pain and satisfaction. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and a musty smell hung in the air, but it was all wonderfully familiar. I opened the windows, and the sea breeze rushed in, carrying the sound of crashing waves. I could almost see Robert sitting on the porch, and a little Angela running around with her kite. A single tear rolled down my cheek. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls. The living room still had the old brick fireplace. The bedroom still had the green floral curtains Robert had picked out. I paused in what used to be Angela's childhood room. On the wall, I could still see the faint pencil marks where she had practiced writing her first letters. I whispered softly, "This room will always be waiting for you, my dear, but not in the way you think." That afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, and the light danced on the water. In my hand was the new key. I gripped it tightly, feeling the cool metal, and a new resolve hardened within me. This was only the beginning. When I got home, Peterson called to ask, "How are you feeling?" I replied, my voice steady. "Relieved, but I'm not stopping here." He responded thoughtfully, "I understand. This house was just the first move." I smiled. "That's right. Angela thinks she sold everything. She has no idea that everything she threw away, I can take back." That night, I wrote in my little notebook. I recorded the date, reclaimed the beach house, a feeling of both loss and victory. But more importantly, I've made the first move. The game has officially begun. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and sat in the darkness for a long time. My mind was strangely calm. The pain was still there, but it no longer paralyzed me. It had transformed into a strength that pushed me forward. I looked up at Robert's picture on the wall. His kind eyes seemed to be encouraging me. I whispered, "You see, my love, I did it. And I'm going to do so much more." The next morning, while walking around the neighborhood, I overheard some gossip. Someone mentioned that Angela and Edward were spending lavishly in Europe, buying designer goods and dining at expensive restaurants. I just smirked. They had no idea that behind their backs, I was quietly picking up every brick they thought they had thrown away. My steps were steadier that day. The cold wind blew through my silver hair, but inside, a warm fire was burning. The fire of a mother who had stopped crying and started fighting back. One afternoon, Peterson asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he was already there, his expression more tense than usual. A thick file lay on his desk. "I have some news you need to hear," Peterson began. He pushed the file toward me. "Edward is drowning in debt, and he's not just borrowing money. He's been using assets he doesn't own as collateral." I opened the file and saw long strings of numbers and tangled legal jargon. Edward's name appeared again and again, alongside various signatures. Angela's name was there, too. My heart clenched as I read. "You mean?" I could barely speak. "I mean, Angela is being dragged into this. Some of the documents are in her name. If this all blows up, the legal responsibility could fall on your daughter." I dropped the pen and sat in silence. The air in the room felt heavy, filled only with the low hum of the ventilation fan. I looked out the window at the gloomy afternoon sky, dark clouds piling up on the horizon. "Edward, he's turned her into a hostage," I said slowly. Peterson nodded. "He's a cunning man. He never takes the fall himself. If he loses, Angela will be the one to pay the price." I closed my eyes, trying to push away the stabbing pain in my chest. I pictured Angela sitting at a fancy restaurant somewhere in Paris, still believing she was living the dream. She had no idea that every bill she signed, every paper she put her name on, was a noose tightening around her neck. "What should I do?" I asked. Peterson looked at me for a long moment before answering. "You need to be prepared. Once the debts collapse, they will come looking for you. It might be Angela, or it might be the creditors, but you shouldn't step in to save her right away. Wait for the right moment." I was silent. A fierce battle raged within me. Part of me wanted to rush to her, pull her away from Edward, and tear up those papers. But at the same time, I knew that if I rescued her too soon, she would never learn her lesson. She would continue to believe in Edward, continue to see me as a safety net. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was dark, save for the dim, yellow glow of a single lamp. The debt file lay on the table like a haunting specter. I picked up one of the pages and looked at Angela's signature. It was rushed, thoughtless. I touched it gently, tears welling in my eyes. "Oh, my child," I whispered. "You're burying yourself and you don't even know it." I remembered when she was little, how I taught her to write each letter. I held her hand, patiently guiding her through the strokes. When she wrote her first perfect A, she jumped for joy and hugged me tightly. Back then, her handwriting was a source of pride. Now, it was a chain. I put the paper down and told myself, "Not yet. Let her fall. Let her feel how hard the ground is." A few days later, I heard a rumor from an acquaintance at the bank. Edward was being pursued by creditors. He owed a significant amount of money and had even mortgaged a luxury apartment he didn't legally own. I feigned indifference and asked, "Does Angela know?" The person shook their head. "Probably not. She's still showing up at parties, spending money like water." I went home, my heart in turmoil. On one hand, I was furious at Angela's blindness. On the other, my heart broke thinking of the day she would discover the truth. That night, I had a nightmare. I saw Angela standing in a dark room, holding a stack of debt papers, her eyes filled with panic. I called out to her, but she couldn't hear me. Edward stood behind her, smiled coldly, and then vanished into the shadows. I woke up in a cold sweat. The next morning, I sat by the window, sipping tea and watching the sunlight spill into the garden. I told myself, the storm is coming. But this time, I won't be the victim. I will be the witness, the one holding the chess pieces. I took out my notebook and added a new line. Edward's debts, Angela implicated. Must prepare. Do not intervene early. When I closed the book, my hands were no longer trembling. I understood that sometimes. To save your child, you have to stand still and let them experience the fall. Only then will the lesson be learned. And I knew. The day Angela came back begging for my help was now just around the corner. Late one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Angela. My heart skipped a beat, but I answered with a calm voice. On the other end, there was only the sound of choked sobs. Mom, her voice was hoarse, trembling like a lost child's. I sat down, gripping the phone tightly. "What is it, Angela?" "Edward. He left me. He took all the money, even the credit cards in my name. I have nothing left. Mom, I'm stranded in Rome. What do I do?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I imagined my daughter, sitting alone in a foreign airport, her mascara streaked, her suitcase empty. A wave of maternal pity washed over me, but I kept my voice steady. "Calm down. Buy a ticket back to the States." I don't have any money. Mom, my passport is being held by the hotel because of the unpaid bill. Mom, I'm so scared. Hearing the terror in her voice twisted my heart, but I knew this was the critical moment. If I swooped in to save her now, she would never learn. I spoke slowly. "Angela, go to the American Embassy. They will help you get home. When you get back, you can stay with me." "But you won't abandon me, will you?" she pleaded. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I have never abandoned you, but you have to be the one to walk out of this darkness." Or after the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. My heart ached, but through the pain, I saw a glimmer of light. This was the moment Robert had foreseen. When Angela hit rock bottom, she would be forced to look up. 2 weeks later, Angela returned. I went to the airport to pick her up. As I watched the passengers file out, I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. She wore a wrinkled dress. One of her heels was broken, and her face was gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. She pulled an empty suitcase behind her, looking around like a lost child. When our eyes met, she burst into tears and ran into my arms. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was so wrong." I held her, my hand trembling as I stroked her hair. "Let's go home, Angela." On the drive back, she sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window with empty eyes. She sighed heavily from time to time, resting her head against the cool glass. I didn't ask questions or place blame. I let the silence hang between us, because I knew the most important questions were the ones she was asking herself. When we arrived home, Angela stepped inside and looked around the familiar living room. She reached out a trembling hand to touch the old sofa. "Mom, everything's the same." I nodded slightly. "I haven't changed anything. You're the one who changed." She hung her head, tears streaming down her face. Then she whispered, "I have nowhere else to go. Can I stay here?" I looked her straight in the eye. For the first time in years, I saw genuine vulnerability, not an act. I sighed. "This will always be your home, but you have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you're not a pampered princess here. You will live like a normal person." Angela nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "I agree. I'll do anything." I set her up in her old childhood room with its faded floral curtains. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly, her face full of shame. "Mom, I've disappointed you so much, haven't I?" I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Admitting you were wrong is the first step, but making it right is a long road." That night, back in my own room, I sat at my desk under the soft glow of the lamp. I had embraced my daughter, but I had also set a new boundary. The pain was still there, but it was mixed with a fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, from this, Angela would finally begin to understand. Angela began her stay at my house in a state of strange silence. She was like a different person. Every morning, I would hear her bedroom door creak open, followed by the soft shuffle of her feet down the wooden hallway. She would sit at the breakfast table, her eyes sunken and her face pale, with no trace of makeup. I let her eat without much conversation. Afterward, I placed a stack of dirty dishes in front of her. She looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but then she nodded and quietly began to wash them. I watched from a distance as the hands that were once used to holding wine glasses in fancy restaurants now trembled under the cold tap water. Soapy water splashed onto her hair, but she didn't complain. "You have to start with the smallest things," I told her. "If you want to live here, you'll have to pull your own weight." Angela bit her lip and whispered, "Okay." In the days that followed, I gave her other chores, mopping the floors, going to the grocery store, doing the laundry. One time, she clumsily spilled a basin of soapy water all over the floor. She sank to her knees, her eyes red with frustration. I walked over and placed the mop in front of her. She looked up at me, then, without a word, began to clean up the mess. In the evenings, I would find her sitting listlessly in her old room. That room still held so many memories, the desk with a few small nicks in the wood, the peeling paint on the dresser, the photos of a teenage Angela taped to the wall. I stood outside her door once and saw her staring at a picture of herself at 16, her smile bright and innocent. She reached out to touch it, then broke down in tears. I didn't go in. I just gently closed the door. I knew that in that moment, she was confronting herself and the past she had lost. One morning, Angela said to me, "Mom, I want to find a job." Her voice was quiet but determined. I nodded. "Good. But be prepared. People won't see you as a society lady anymore." She pressed her lips together. "I know." Angela started sending out resumes and going to interviews. I saw her wearing one of my old blouses and a pair of worn-out slacks. She would spend hours in front of the mirror, practicing her smile and her answers. But she often came home with a heavy sigh and sad eyes. "Mom, they won't hire me. They say I have no experience, and my resume is empty." I just said, "Don't give up. You have to keep trying." Finally, she found a temporary job, cleaning offices at night. After her first shift, she came home exhausted, her hands raw from the cleaning chemicals. She collapsed into a chair, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I never thought I'd be doing this." I sat across from her and said calmly, I once worked as a cleaner to pay for your education. You're now walking the same path I did. There's no shame in that." Angela opened her eyes and looked at me for a long time. For the first time, I saw not contempt in her gaze, but a flicker of understanding. She continued to work, coming home late each night, exhausted and covered in dust. I would wait for her in the living room with a light on. When she walked in, I would silently hand her a glass of water. She would drink it without a word, but her grateful eyes said everything. One night, she broke down sobbing. "Mom, I ran into an old friend at the office today. She used to admire me for marrying Edward, for all my fancy trips. Today, she saw me taking out the trash. I was so ashamed." I placed a hand on her shoulder and said slowly, "Shame isn't about hard work. Shame is about deceiving people and looking down on others. You're relearning the most basic thing, how to live by your own efforts." She cried for a long time, but then she nodded. I felt a weight lift from her shoulders. One weekend afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, I found another small envelope. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box and a note from Robert. "When you need more strength, open this. I've left not just wealth, but memories." I clutched the key, my heart swelling. Angela had just come home from the market and set the grocery bags on the table. She saw me and asked curiously, "What's that? Mom?" I smiled and tucked the key into my pocket. "Something your father left. When the time is right, I'll show you." I saw a flicker of hope in Angela's eyes, mixed with fear. She didn't press further, just quietly turned away. That night, I lay in bed, holding the key. My mind filled with emotion. I knew the road ahead for Angela was still long, but step by step, she was beginning to grasp the truth about the value of work, of responsibility, and of family. That morning, I decided to take Angela to the bank with me. She was surprised when I told her, her eyes wide with confusion. "The bank? Do you have some business there?" she asked hesitantly. I simply nodded. "There's something your father left. It's time we opened it." During the bus ride, Angela was silent. She sat beside me, her hands gripping her purse strap, her gaze distant. I could feel her tension, a mixture of anticipation and fear. The large bank building loomed before us, its lobby bright and polished. I presented the key to a clerk and signed the ledger. Angela stood close, her breathing shallow. We were led down to the vault, a long corridor lined with steel doors. The clerk opened our box and placed a long, cold metal container in front of us. My heart pounded as I turned the key. Angela tensed, her eyes fixed on my hands. The lid popped open. Inside were small trays filled with gold jewelry, antique watches, and several stacks of documents. But there was something else. Another envelope with Robert's handwriting on it, "For Antonia and Angela." I took a deep breath and handed the envelope to Angela. "You open it." Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a long letter and a few old photographs. She picked them up, her voice catching as she began to read. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I want you to know that happiness is not found in the things you own, but in how you cherish them. This jewelry is a keepsake from me, but its true value is not in the gold or silver, but in the memories attached to them. Remember, money can be lost, but love never can be. If you ever forget that, you will lose your way. I hope you never forget." Angela let the letter fall, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the first photo, a picture of her as a little girl, sitting on Robert's shoulders, her smile as bright as the sun. Another photo showed our family at the beach, me in a blue dress, Robert holding a kite. and Angela running ahead. "I forgot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I forgot how much Dad loved me." I sat beside her, quietly watching her tremble. In that moment, I saw not an arrogant woman, but a lost child trying to find her way home. But then, her expression shifted. Her eyes fell on the jewelry, the gold bracelets, necklaces, the diamond rings. A flicker of desire lit up her face. "Mom!" She turned to me, her voice shaking. "Could we sell some of this to pay off my debts? I need money to get out of this mess." I sat still, looking directly into her eyes. I saw the conflict warring within her. Part of her was still the child craving love, but the other part had not yet escaped the habit of relying on material things. "Angela," I said slowly, "this isn't just property. This is a piece of your father's memory. If you see it only as money, you will lose your way again." She looked down, silent. Her hand trembled as she touched a pearl necklace. I watched, my heart aching, but I didn't interfere. I had to let her make her own choice. The bank clerk waited for our decision. I gathered a few important documents but left the jewelry for Angela to hold. I wanted to see what she would do with it. On the way home, she clutched the box, her face a mask of confusion and longing. I said nothing, just stared out the window. The sky that day was gray and overcast, threatening rain. When we got home, Angela placed the box on the table and sat motionless. I brought her a cup of tea. "You have to think for yourself. I won't force you." She nodded, her eyes red. "I know, but I'm scared. Scared I'll make the wrong choice again." I looked deep into her eyes. Sometimes you have to make the wrong choice one more time to learn how to make the right one. But this time, you will have to face the consequences alone. She bit her lip and nodded slightly. I knew a fierce battle was raging inside her. I couldn't fight it for her. I could only watch, just as Robert had written in his letter. Let her learn the true value. That night, I heard her bedroom door open. Angela came out, carrying the box, and went to the kitchen. I watched from the hallway as she sat at the table and laid out each piece of jewelry. She stared at each ring, each bracelet, and then she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned away and left her alone with her grief. I knew this was only the beginning. A few days later, Angela came home with red-rimmed eyes and empty hands. The jewelry box was gone. She walked slowly into the kitchen and sank into a chair, a soulless shadow of her former self. "Mom," she began, her voice hoarse, "I sold it all. There's only a little money left, not nearly enough to pay off the debts. I'm such a fool." I poured her a cup of tea and set it in front of her. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Angela buried her face in her hands and sobbed, her tears soaking the old wooden table. I sat in silence, my heart twisting, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. This was a pain she needed to feel. The next day, she left early in the morning and returned late in the evening, her clothes wrinkled and her shoes dusty. She said quietly, "I got a job cleaning offices. At night. They're giving me a trial run." I nodded. "Good. That's a start." In the weeks that followed, Angela came home late from work. I would leave a light on in the living room and wait up for her. When she walked in, her back stooped, her hands calloused, and the smell of chemicals clinging to her clothes, she would drop her bag, collapse into a chair, and drink the glass of water I offered. There were no complaints, only a fleeting look of gratitude. One evening, she confessed, "Mom, today I had to clean the toilets. An old friend saw me. I wanted to die of shame." I looked her straight in the eye. "Are you ashamed of working?" Or are you ashamed because an old friend who knew you when you were living a life of luxury saw you like this?" She froze, then fell silent. A moment later, she said softly, "I understand." Gradually, I saw Angela change. She no longer spent hours in front of the mirror, no longer fussed over her appearance. In the mornings, she would put on simple clothes, tie her hair back, and take the lunch I packed for her, heading off to work like anyone else. When she came home, she would help me cook, wash dishes, and clean the house without the resentful frown she used to wear. One night, I walked past her room and heard muffled sobs. I stood silently outside the door. Her trembling voice drifted out. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I've caused Mom so much pain. I was so foolish, so blind." My chest ached. I wanted to go in and hold her, but I stopped myself. I knew she needed to say those words, not for me, but for herself. On a Sunday, I asked her to come to the market with me. Angela used to call the local market filthy, but that day, she carefully selected vegetables and asked for prices. She even smiled at the vendor and insisted on carrying the heavy bags for me. Seeing that, I felt a sense of both surprise and relief. That evening, we sat together on the porch in the cool breeze. She said quietly, "Mom, I never thought a simple home-cooked meal could taste so good." I looked at her and smiled faintly. "It's because you've known real hunger and real work. When you pay for your food with your own sweat, you learn to appreciate it." Angela nodded, her eyes welling up. I think I'm just beginning to understand a little of what you did for me." In that moment, I felt as if Robert were sitting beside us, smiling his gentle smile. I whispered in my heart, "You see, my love? She's changing, but change always comes with challenges." A few weeks later, the company Angela worked for had unexpected layoffs. She came home clutching a notice, her face pale. "Mom, they let me go. I have no money left." I looked her straight in the eye. "You'll find another job. You can't give up after one setback." Angela bit her lip, tears streaming down her face, but she nodded. For the first time, I saw true determination in her eyes. She applied everywhere: supermarkets, fast food restaurants, coffee shops. Some places rejected her. Others offered only temporary work. But this time, she didn't quit. I saw her staying up late to work on her resume, waking up early for interviews, and coming home with rain-soaked shoes without a single complaint. One evening, she returned holding a green apron. "Mom, they hired me at the coffee shop on the corner. It's hard work, but I'm happy." I looked at my daughter, her eyes shining with a newfound hope. In that moment, I knew Angela had truly hit rock bottom, and from there, she had started to climb back up, with her own two hands. I smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Good. This is your path now." One autumn morning, a thick envelope from the courthouse arrived. Angela picked it up. The moment she saw the official seal, she began to tremble. She tore it open, her eyes widening in panic. "Mom, it's a court summons. I'm being sued for the unpaid debts. I don't know what to do." I took the papers and quickly scanned the pages. It was just as I had expected. The loans Edward had taken out, many of them in Angela's name. The creditors were taking her to court. Angela was frantic, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Mom, if I go to court, I'll lose everything. Could I go to jail?" I put my hands on her shoulders, my voice calm. "Stay calm. You won't be alone. It's time to face the truth." I called Peterson that same day. When he heard the news, he sighed but agreed. "It's time to bring out all the files. I'll represent both you and Angela, but we need to be prepared. This won't be easy." In the days that followed, my small house became a command center. Peterson brought over stacks of documents, and we marked them up with red ink. Angela sat beside us, her eyes glued to each signature, each number. "Mom, that's my signature. But I don't even remember signing it." I looked at her and said slowly, "You signed it when you were blindly in love with Edward. This is the consequence." She buried her face in her hands. But this time, she didn't just cry. She sat up, picked up a pen, and tried to understand the dense legal text. I saw a real change in her. She wasn't running away anymore. She was facing it. The day of the hearing, the sky was gray and a light rain was falling. Angela wore a simple white blouse and black slacks. I held her hand as we walked into the courtroom. Across the room, the creditors sat in a long row, their faces grim. The judge banged the gavel. The trial began. The plaintiff's lawyer stood up, his voice sharp. The defendant, Angela, co-signed for multiple large loans, totaling over $1 million. Here is the proof of her signature. We demand she be held fully responsible. Angela trembled, but Peterson rose to his feet, his voice firm. "Your Honor, it is true that Angela signed these documents, but we will prove that she was the victim of systematic fraud, orchestrated by her ex-husband, Edward." I sat beside her, my heart racing. The creditors' glares were like daggers aimed at Angela. But this time, my daughter didn't break down. She lifted her head, and though her voice shook, it was clear. I was blind. I trusted the wrong person, but I'm not running away. I am ready to take responsibility as long as the truth comes out. The courtroom fell silent. I looked at Angela, a mix of pride and pain swelling in my chest. The child who used to hide from her problems was now standing before a judge, speaking her truth. Peterson presented the evidence, emails from Edward, forged contracts, and even testimony from a former business partner who had also been scammed. The judge listened intently, banging the gavel for order when the opposing counsel tried to object. "We acknowledge that the signature is Angela's," Peterson argued, "but the circumstances of the signing were based on deceit. She did not profit from these loans. On the contrary, she lost everything. Her mother, Mrs. Antonia, also has proof of separate assets left by her late husband, assets completely unrelated to these debts." When I was called to the stand, I held the file Robert had left me. My voice was low but steady. "My husband, Robert, left me these assets to protect our family. He always warned me about deceitful people. My daughter didn't listen. Now, she is paying the price. However, I ask the court to see her for what she is, not a criminal, but a victim." Angela looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears. But she didn't fall into despair. She sat tall, listening to every word. After hours of intense debate, the judge delivered the verdict. The court recognizes Angela's liability, but given the circumstances, the majority of the responsibility lies with Edward. The debts will be restructured. Angela will not be held liable for the full amount and will be allowed to negotiate a payment plan. This court is adjourned. A murmur went through the room. Angela covered her face and finally let the tears come. I pulled her into my arms and whispered, "You did it. You stood up for yourself." Peterson packed his briefcase and gave me a nod. "This isn't a total victory, but it's a fair start." On the way home, Angela held my hand tightly. "Mom, I swear I will never let myself get into a situation like this again. I want to start over. I want to live an honest life." I looked at her and saw a new light in her eyes. And in my heart, I heard Robert's voice whisper, "Finally, she understands." The day Angela officially signed the settlement agreement with her creditors, the winter sky was unusually clear and blue. Pale sunlight washed over the busy streets. As she walked out of the courthouse, she turned to me, her expression no longer one of panic, but of calm resolve. "Mom," she said quietly, "for the first time in my life, I feel a sense of relief. Not because I'm free from the burden, but because I don't have to pretend anymore." I nodded, silent. Her words resonated within me like a bell. My daughter had truly changed. In the weeks that followed, Angela continued working at the coffee shop. She learned to greet customers with a smile, to froth milk perfectly, to wipe down tables. When I stopped by one day and saw her behind the counter, her sleeves rolled up, a sheen of sweat on her brow, I was moved. The woman who was once accustomed to a life of luxury was now earning a living with her own 2 hands. One evening, she came home with a small envelope. "Mom, this is my first month's paycheck. I want to contribute to the household expenses." I looked at the thin envelope, my heart aching with pride. I didn't take it, just pushed it back toward her. "You keep it. What's important isn't the amount of money, but the fact that you've learned to value every dollar you earn." Angela's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "I understand." That night, we sat on the porch, a cool breeze blowing gently. She looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Do you think Dad can see me? Mom? I hope he's proud of me, even though it took me so long to learn." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father always believed you would find your way back. Today, you have." As time went on, Angela grew stronger. She was no longer afraid of what others thought, no longer avoided talking about her mistakes. She told old friends what had happened, that she had lost everything and had to start over from scratch. Surprisingly, many of them rallied around her, not with pity, but with admiration. One day, she came home and told me, "Mom, a young woman came into the shop today. She was being manipulated by her boyfriend, just like I was. She heard my story and said that I gave her the courage to leave him. Mom, for the first time. I feel like my past mistakes can actually help someone else." I looked at my daughter, my heart swelling with pride. It was true. Scars, when healed, can become a source of strength for others. Then, one day, Angela showed me a small notebook. Inside, she had written out her plans, a monthly debt repayment schedule, savings goals, and a list of skills she wanted to learn. She said, "Mom, I want to live a good life. I don't want to disappoint Dad or break your heart ever again." I took the notebook, my hands trembling. "You've grown up, Angela. You finally understand." She smiled, a gentle, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in years. That night, I sat alone and reread the letter Robert had left me. His familiar words seemed to echo in the room. Trust in her, even when she is lost. One day, she will find her way home. I began to cry, but they were tears of peace. Angela was no longer the arrogant child, nor the fugitive running from her past. She had walked through the abyss, and now she stood on her own 2 feet. I knew then that victory wasn't about how much money we had, but about finding freedom in our own souls. And the most wonderful miracle of all was that, on this journey, the bond between a mother and her daughter had finally been restored. Dear listener, if you followed this story to the end, I want to share something from my heart. Money can buy you glittering moments, but only love and inner freedom are true victories. When we dare to face our mistakes, dare to rise from the depths, we find a strength greater than any fortune. Thank you for listening to this story of a mother, a daughter, and their journey from loss to freedom. If this story touched your heart, please support our channel so we can continue to bring you meaningful and emotional stories from everyday life. I wish you, wherever you are, true love and peace in your soul.